In September of 1955, Vladimir Nabokov, the Russian author and esteemed literary professor, published the iconic 20th century novel Lolita. The book was a smash success that would not only pay for Nabokov's retirement, but also eclipse his entire remaining body of work. Nabokov had worked on the novel as a labor of love since 1939. He claimed it was inspired by a news story about an ape in the Jardin des Plantes in France, an ape who, after persistent coaxing from a scientist, produced a charcoal drawing. The drawing depicted the bars of the creature's own cage. Nabokov spent years laboring over the manuscript and shopping it around to numerous publishers. All of them rejected the novel because of its controversial subject matter, which I will explain in a minute. Eventually, French publisher Olympia Press agreed to publish the first edition of Lolita in 2 volumes, and the novel was finally picked up in America by G.P. Putnam's Sons, and critics devoured it. For those who aren't familiar with Lolita, I must stress that this novel's staying power is unprecedented. To this day, Lolita is scattered all over English lit syllabuses in high schools and universities in several countries, and even still banned in some. And to say that Lolita is one of the most controversial novels in the history of Western literature would be the understatement of the millennium. What makes the story so taboo is the fact that it's written from the perspective of an adult man named Humbert Humbert, who becomes infatuated with his 12-year-old stepdaughter Dolores Hayes, or Lolita, as he calls her. In fewer words, he's a pedophile. Lolita is a story that's viewed as comical to some, tragic to others, and obscene to many, and rightfully so. Going into the book, I expected to recoil in disgust on every page. And now, on the other side of finishing the book, I do find the story very tragic, yes, but it's also scary, because Nabokov's use of language really tests the reader's morals, showing how easy it could be for anyone, and I mean anybody, to become susceptible to this type of manipulation. Using flowery language and compelling prose in the text, Nabokov made it easy for readers to sympathize with Humbert before even realizing it, which is exactly how an abuser ensnares their victims. In fewer words, Humbert Humbert is the quintessential unreliable narrator. Based on the information given, you might wonder how a story like this has managed to become one of the most important and critically lauded novels of all time, but that wasn't always the case. The book was banned in several countries upon its release. Let's not forget that the only company that would publish the book in its first release, Olympia Press, was a French pornographic publisher. It wasn't until Lolita got published in America that audiences started treating it favorably, and I think it's a testament to Nabokov's writing that a book documenting such a disturbing and grotesque turn of events can still maintain such a rich and compelling plot. When interviewed, Nabokov said he considered Lolita to be his love letter to the English language, and it really shows. Humbert's erudite musings and Shakespearean soliloquies distract from the fact that he's a pompous, racist, sexist, and classist pedophile. Throughout his narration, Humbert even admits to several stays in psychiatric hospitals where he successfully rebuffed his psychiatrist's attempts to treat him properly. The manipulative text is Nabokov's nefarious and extremely clever way of illuminating how easily a predator can cloak themselves under the guise of respectability. Readers are led to believe that Humbert is not so bad, and is maybe even a tragic hero because he presents himself as such. Or as our friend Sparky Sweets from Thug Notes put it,
"This fool gone and even made the reader unreliable. Damn, ain't that some shit?"
When I think about the cultural impact of Lolita, I often think of Stockholm Syndrome and the Mandela Effect. Readers seem to be collectively seduced by the novel the minute they open the book. Take the opening passage, for example.
Lolita, light of my life, fire of my loins, my sin, my soul. Lolita, the tip of the tongue taking a trip of 3 steps down the palate to tap at 3 on the teeth. Lolita.
At that point, you're hooked. Nabokov has sunk his claws into your conscience. How could you resist an opening so enticing? I'm sure that those of you yelling at your computer screen right now probably already know where I'm going with this, but that's not really the opening passage of the book. The real intro of Lolita is a fictional foreword by another one of Nabokov's fictional characters in the story, an editor named John Ray Jr., who states that he is presenting a memoir by a convict going under the pseudonym Humbert Humbert. John Ray Jr. explains in the foreword that Humbert Humbert has just died in prison of coronary thrombosis, and he goes on to assert that the following story ought to be examined as a case history. But the most vital comment he makes in the foreword is when he cautions the reader not to take Humbert's word at face value, stating, "I have no intention to glorify H.H. No doubt he is horrible. He is abject. He is a shining example of moral leprosy, a mixture of ferocity and jocularity that betrays supreme misery, perhaps, but is not conducive to attractiveness. He is ponderously capricious. Most of his casual opinions on the people and scenery of this country are ludicrous. A desperate honesty that throbs through his confession does not absolve him from sins of diabolical cunning. He is abnormal. He is not a gentleman." Essentially, what he's saying is, this man's crazy. Do not trust a word he says. So why do people love misinterpreting Lolita in such bad faith? And why does the book's most famous cover quote from a review in Vanity Fair say, well, this? I hate it here. I first encountered Lolita during my freshman year of college on the syllabus for my Gender of Modernism class, and in classic Gen Z fashion, the first time I ever heard the word Lolita was in the Lana Del Rey song of the same name. Put a pin in that. I have plenty to say about her. I never got to actually read the novel at that time because I dropped that course within the span of 3 weeks. I can't speak for others, I can only speak for myself, but personally, the idea of trying to break through walls of esoteric text of James Joyce pontificating in an Irish field bored me to tears. The many times that I had attempted to read Lolita after the fact, I never could get through it. Because I could never will myself to read past that one nauseating passage where Humbert bounces Dolores on his lap. Something that was also done to Nabokov as a child, by his abusive uncle, might I add. I finally mustered the strength to read the novel in full after 2021 when, in the aftermath of lockdown, I devoured comedian Jamie Loftus's excellent Lolita podcast, which I would highly recommend listening to. Essentially, this whole podcast sees Loftus tracing the cultural pervasiveness of Lolita from its literary origins to Lolita's current status as a doomed cultural icon. And a big part of what makes Lolita so enticing to me is the fact that the novel and its subsequent adaptation seem to be a perfect breeding ground for life-imitating art. When we think of the word Lolita today, I still don't think most of us would think about a helpless 12-year-old girl being taken advantage of by a man several decades her senior. Instead, we think of a young seductress who uses her femininity and sex appeal to get what she wants out of older men, which is obviously absurd and ridiculous to begin with, and it baffles me that people actually still demonize little girls like this. Although, I also find it completely unsurprising. I think Loftus summed up the cultural misinterpretations of Lolita beautifully on the first episode of the podcast, stating the following.
The sexual assault of girls is a gigantic issue, and an issue that sexualization of girls in media is in direct conversation with. And the difference between how publicly these issues are discussed between 1955 and now is gigantic. So, yeah, reactions to Lolita are big, and it makes total sense that they are.
Now, it would require several volumes worth of books in order to fully unpack the gory details of how closely this book mirrors the pervasive phenomenon of glorified pedophiles in the public eye who get off scot-free because of their social capital. So, just to paint you a picture of just how pervasive this is, I'll just read you a list of famous men who have pursued or assaulted prepubescent girls as young as 12 years old or younger. And brace yourselves, because this is gonna be a long one. Frank Sinatra, Woody Allen, Charlie Chaplin. The list goes on. It would take forever to unpack just how damaging the misinterpretation of Lolita in pop culture has been for young consumers, especially young women and non-men as a whole. I don't find it to be a coincidence that every single leading lady in film and stage adaptations of Lolita had their entire lives upended and destroyed right after participating in these adaptations, or the fact that the directors of these adaptations still believe that they were adapting a tragic love story and not a cautionary tale about pedophilia. And don't even get me started on advertising and the music industry. If you're a millennial, I'm sure you'll remember when Dakota Fanning appeared in that Marc Jacobs Oh Lola perfume campaign when she was still underage. Another example would be celebrity photographer David LaChapelle encouraging one of his clients, a 17-year-old Britney Spears, to, quote, push it further and do this whole Lolita thing when he shot her 1999 Rolling Stone cover feature. You could even make the argument that the entire foundation that Lana Del Rey built her career on was one that glorified age gap relationships with allusions to the novel, subsequently convincing an entire generation of Tumblr girls that molding themselves into cutesy jailbait for skeezy older men was a good idea, but I still don't think some of y'all are ready for that conversation. Now listen, I'm not here to do a lengthy docu-series or rake through the Lolita complex with a fine-tooth comb, not because I don't want to, but because I don't have the mental capacity to take on the weight of such a mentally taxing project, and two, there are other creators who have already done that and done a far better job than I ever could. So if that's something you're looking to sink your teeth into, then allow me to direct you to their videos. The focus of this video will be purely on music. I'm going to take 10 pop songs that are either directly or indirectly inspired by Lolita, and I will rank them based on how these themes are traversed in the lyrics. So let's get right into it. This one's pretty self-explanatory. It's almost too on the nose, but for the 2 or 3 of you not yet in the know, the late R&B songstress Aaliyah started her career at the age of 14. This song was written by the now disgraced R&B veteran R. Kelly. R. Kelly marrying Aaliyah when he was 27 and she was just 15 is one of the many high-profile instances of abuse from R. Kelly that was simply brushed under the rug by the public at the time, and knowing that this was happening behind the scenes makes this song all the more nauseating knowing that he wrote it. Here's just a few of the most stomach-churning lyrics to this song. I don't mean to be bold, but I gotta let you know, I've got a thing for you, and I can't let it go. My age ain't nothing but a number. Ick. When you add on the layer of adultification that so many young black women and girls face, being treated as more mature than they actually are from the age of 5, that makes the trauma of young black women and girls even less likely to be taken seriously, another reason why the public and the criminal justice system failed R. Kelly's victims. And given the horrific nature of the context of this song, it has no redeeming qualities. And there are still certain people who will argue that we should be able to separate the art from the artist, but when it comes to R. Kelly, the very subject matter taking center stage in his songwriting makes this impossible. French-Canadian singer-songwriter Celine Dion needs no introduction. She's a legend, no two ways about it. But I would personally love for this song to be scrubbed from ever existing. The title translates to Lolita, Too Young to Love. And here's a passage from the lyrics. You say I'm too young to live with a man. I tell you, I don't care. I don't care. Lolita is not too young to love. Ain't too young to give herself away. Yikes bikes. This song was released in 1987 when Celine was just 19, and it was written by two adult men who look like this, no surprise there, but what really gives me the ick factor is the context of Celine's personal life at the time. For those of you who aren't aware of the circumstances of Celine Dion's marriage, Celine married her manager, Renee Angelil. They met when she was just 12 years old and started dating in secret when she turned 18. And in her autobiography, she writes, "The first time I sang the words to Lolita, I was in front of Renee, and I sang it to arouse him. Thanks, I hate it." I don't think I need to give further explanation for why this song is ranked so low.
Bitch, do you not understand that 38-year-old man, when he met the 12-year-old, if he waited until she was 18, that means he was lusting after a child for 6 fucking years. Do you understand how disgusting that is? If you don't, please, and I say this with as much love as I possibly can, go get your head checked. She was 12.
Moving on. Lana Del Rey's debut album, Born to Die, is a phenomenon that will continue to baffle writers and academia for a very long time. To put it lightly, Lana Del Rey is no stranger to controversy, but this has been a thing since her breakout years. And I don't think I've ever encountered anybody who doesn't have a very strong opinion about her. To this day, audiences and critics still remain confused about where exactly she fits in the cultural zeitgeist. So while there's not much I can say about Lana that hasn't already been written or opined by other people with an internet connection, I think that her use of the Lolita aesthetic still warrants discussion. What's interesting here is the fact that Lana was lucky enough to voluntarily cast herself into the nymphette image in her late 20s. Not many pop stars have been so lucky. It's more common that young pop stars are forcibly molded into that role, often when underage. Former child stars like Britney and Christina Aguilera were both pigeonholed into this nymphette trope and forced to grow up faster than they might have liked to and embody a hypersexual aesthetic as soon as they turned 18, if not earlier. At least Lana had a choice in the matter. That's one silver lining to be found here. The song, on the other hand, yeah, this one really misses the mark. It's a no for me, dog. Lana takes the creative liberty of singing from the perspective of Dolores Hayes, framing the Humbert Humbert figure as her, quote, one true love, even going so far as to claim that she would die if he left her, which is very much not the case. If you've read the book, you'll find that it's quite the opposite. The song quotes Humbert Humbert's opening dialogue in the book directly in the pre-chorus.
Light of my life, fire of my loins, be a good baby, do what I want. Light of my life, fire of my loins, give me them gold coins, give me them.
The gold coins in question refer to the allowance that Dolores eventually steals from Humbert in order to escape. Lana framing this as some kind of transactional relationship that places Dolores Hayes, a victim of kidnapping and repeated rape, into the role of a sugar baby or some damsel who would be helpless without Humbert totally misses the mark. Lana claims that Lolita is one of her favorite books, and that makes me wonder, did we even read the same book? Her understanding of the story reads more like someone who watched the 1997 Adrian Lyne film adaptation of Lolita once and decided to base their entire personality off of Dominique Swain's portrayal of Dolores Hayes. It's also worth noting that the Tumblr trend of the Lolita/underage nymphette aesthetic and the glamorization of online parasocial grooming that took Tumblr by storm in the 2010s can almost single-handedly be traced back to Lana's influence. In my research, I've come across a lot of young adult women who were preteens at Lana's peak and did find themselves romanticizing age gap relationships, and as a result, they found themselves in dangerous situations where they became the victims of parasocial grooming. Caitlin Andrews wrote an excellent essay in Grain of Salt magazine about the phenomenon, explaining, Lana Del Rey's lyrical fascination was not the sole source in analyzing the development of the nymphette Tumblr trend, as is the general issue with the misinterpretation of unreliable narrators, but it should be publicly acknowledged that the majority of young women who were taken in by the narrative were vulnerable and put at increased risk of sexual abuse and grooming. It is unfair to sweep the damage done under the rug as simply an aesthetic, as it was previously referred to by both witnesses and active participants in the nymphette trend due to the real-life consequences involved in the fetishization of sexual abuse amongst young people who may not have all the context to critically assess the immoral actions of Humbert Humbert. And now, I don't want to completely disregard or condemn Lana's actions because it is worth noting that Lana Del Rey was a victim of grooming at the hands of one of her teachers as a child, and you could perhaps look into her reworking and reappropriation of the nymphette aesthetic as a way to reclaim her agency in the situation. And I might go a little easier on her if her music hadn't done net harm to countless young, impressionable girls. Unfortunately, that is not the case. However, I'm also not putting the blame squarely on her and her alone, as she is just one of many famous figures who have misinterpreted the text. But with great power comes great responsibility, and she was the most visible and relevant cultural figure back in the 2010s. So in my humble opinion, the damage that's already been done is irreversible.
From the start, we can't stay apart. Everywhere I turn, I'm trapped in your heart.
The Veronicas are an Australian pop duo made up of twin sisters Lisa and Jessica Origliasso. Lolita was a standalone single that they released in 2012, and it was supposed to appear on the following album that they released. However, they ended up running into legal issues with their label. Here are some of the lyrics. So illegal. No evil is seen with these eyes. I won't tell if you won't, and I will if you want. Nothing is sacred, don't care if it's wrong. In an interview with Noise 11, Jessica Origliasso said, "To us, Lolita is about power play. It's the power play between genders and age groups, as well as people's perception of taboo, boundaries, what is acceptable, and what a Lolita is. She's a badass, and she's on a mission. She wants to destroy something, either her own perception of what's right and wrong, or everyone else's. She wants to prove something to herself." Tight. Nice try, Jessica. Pedophilia is not rebellious or transgressive. I get what they were trying to go for, but literally any other femme fatale archetype other than a 12-year-old would have done just fine. I like the Veronicas and I'm still rooting for them, but this one aged poorly.
Damn, I studied Lolita religiously.
Katy Perry's affinity for the nymphette trope is well documented. The cover of her debut album, One of the Boys, shows the pop star lounging in a suburban backyard, wearing a crop top and shorts and biting on a pair of dark glasses, a clear visual reference to the Stanley Kubrick adaptation of Lolita starring Sue Lyon. The lyrics to the titular track are as follows. So over the summer, something changed. I started reading 17 and shaving my legs, and I studied Lolita religiously. And I walked right into school and caught you staring at me. The problem I have with this song is the same problem I had with Lana Del Rey's, in that it involves an adult woman cosplaying as an inviting underage girl. And there is no such thing as a consenting minor. Perry is an adult, so I guess maybe this isn't the worst thing in the world, but need I remind you that in a world where victims of child rape are never taken seriously and often don't receive any justice? It's honestly a lukewarm take at this point to suggest that framing a child as an inviting seductress is a bad idea. Next. Elise is a French pop star who attained popularity for her several best-selling albums in the early aughts. She was essentially the French's answer to Britney Spears, and her breakout hit, Moi Lolita, was basically her baby one more time, along with an appalling music video which has several parallels to Lolita the novel. Here's a rough translation of the lyrics. My name is Lolita, Lo or Lola, the same thing. When I dream of wolves, it's Lola who bleeds. When fork my tongue, I have there a giggle as crazy as a phenomenon. This song is fine, I guess? I mean, the lyrics are so innocuous that it's difficult to even discern where its writers even stand on the subject matter. It doesn't feel like an endorsement or a denouncement of the text. The song was co-written by Mylene Farmer, so I guess that gives me a bit of solace knowing that a woman was in the writer's room. I was expecting to look at the credits and see a boardroom full of men, so that was a pleasant surprise. Now, bear in mind also that Elise was only 16 when this happened, but here's what she had to say about Lolita in a televised interview. Lolita is a young girl, a teenager who pleases boys, but older boys. I would hope maybe she has a different outlook on this now. I can't really fault her. Again, she was just 16. The song itself, though, is not terrible, and that's why it's directly in the middle of the list.
Oh, baby, how was I supposed to know?
It's impossible to talk about the Lolita effect on pop culture without mentioning Britney Spears. As I mentioned before, her cover shoot with Rolling Stone in 1999 was directly inspired by Lolita and the nymphette aesthetic, and she was only 17 when she appeared on that cover. I have to give kudos to Max Martin for his chops. I think that his masterful pop arrangements alongside Britney's sassy vocal flair is a match made in heaven. In America, we're obviously going to hear a lyric like "Hit me baby one more time" and make the connection to domestic violence. However, this isn't what the term "hit me" meant to Martin. In Sweden, "hit me" is slang for "give me a call," like how here we say "hit me up." Martin had worked on this song for a while and shopped it around to several pop stars, including the R&B group TLC and Swedish synth pop darling Robin, and most of these artists rejected the song because of the controversial lyric "Hit me baby one more time" and all that it implied. And it finally landed in the right hands when Britney accepted it, and the clear domestic violence correlation obviously wouldn't fly with American radio or strict corporate enterprises carrying the CD like Walmart and Target. So they altered the title to ellipsis, baby one more time. It's honestly a bummer that this song has that much baggage attached to it because it's such a bop. And while it doesn't reference Lolita directly, the way that Britney was treated at the time and still is today to some extent is definitely aligned with how unforgiving audiences can be to a young woman in the public eye who isn't afraid to be forward and provocative with her image. And now knowing everything that we do know about her former conservatorship, it's honestly pretty tragic the way that her own family and even millions of people watching her to this day still treat her like she's a child, despite her being a full-grown woman in her early 40s. Is it evident I have conflicted feelings about this song? I think that sums it up. Moving on.
Elle lutte mes chaussures, mes chaussettes et ma jupe. J'ai 20 ans murmuré, les jours de mon comme pute.
Jane Birkin is a notable French multi-hyphenate in the entertainment industry, dipping her toes into acting, modeling, and even a lucrative music career. She got her start in acting, appearing in numerous films throughout the 60s, including The Knack and How to Get It, Kaleidoscope, and Slogan, which she starred in alongside her frequent collaborator and former romantic partner Serge Gainsbourg, who also penned a great deal of her songs, including the titular song off her 1975 album, Lolita Go Home, which wasn't as bad as I expected it to be. I mean, the bar is pretty low in this regards, so I'll take what I can get. But these lyrics are almost defiantly progressive and ahead of their time. Here's a loosely translated passage from the song. At the restaurant car, I ordered a tea. I'm not doing anything wrong. I have my legs apart, and yet in front of me, an old gentleman salivates. And I listen to the song of the locomotive. These lyrics remind me of a pretty devastating quote from the American author Mary Gateskill, who spoke about Me Too in a Q&A she did for one of her recent novels. Here's what she said.
I didn't find it shocking if men groped me or something. I kind of expected them to do that, actually, because they did. Maybe they don't anymore, but it just like when I was younger, if I walked down the street, I didn't even have to be dressed especially provocatively, and guys would do things, boys usually, and most girls I knew had that experience, so I didn't consider it shocking or outrageous, irritating. And I would curse at people. Sometimes I'd actually hit or kick people even, but it wasn't something that I considered to be an outrage, and I'm not sure what I think of it that it is now considered an outrage. I don't know.
I mean, this confession says so little yet so much, and I feel the same way about these song lyrics. It really puts the reality that women and young girls have to deal with from as early as the ages of 10 to 12 into perspective. We learn pretty quickly that just by existing, we are putting ourselves in danger of being harassed on a daily basis. With lyrics like, all the proper people turn on me, mainly women, I don't know why, the song even tackles the insecurities surrounding femininity that older women often project onto little girls as a direct result of the oppression they've internalized. I was pleasantly surprised to read these lyrics and discover how sympathetic it was to the young prepubescent girl's experience by framing the lyrics through the little girl's perspective. So good on Jane Birkin. Released in 1996, Fiona Apple's debut album Tidal was a smash hit, its runaway single being Criminal. And while this song does not explicitly reference Lolita, it would be disingenuous not to include Fiona Apple in this conversation because of how closely her early career trajectory mirrors the trajectory of Lolita the character. Apple was just a teenager when she suddenly skyrocketed to A-list celebrity status overnight, and she very openly struggled to acclimate to her album's success, appearing visibly uncomfortable with her newfound status, as any 17-year-old under the scrutiny of the public eye would be. When she voiced her discontent with fame and condemned the exploitative nature and hypocrisy of Hollywood at the VMAs, she was blacklisted and punished pretty severely. People called her insufferable, ungrateful, pretentious, a brat, and a whole host of other derogatory names that I refuse to repeat in this video because it's honestly really depressing that actual adults wrote these things about a child. In an essay in Nylon, Men Explain Fiona Apple to Me, Kristen Iverson does an excellent job of illuminating how this treatment of Apple could have easily broken her spirit and derailed her life in a very similar way to Dolores Hayes, explaining, Tidal sold almost 3 million copies. Its runaway single was Criminal, whose video benefited from being aired during MTV's last gasp at relevance. It went viral before the term meant anything, and its blatantly seductive imagery of a hyper-attenuated Apple lolling around a rec room with an anonymous group of men and women guaranteed that it would be a focal point for the kind of critics who love to apply the name Lolita to any young woman whose sexuality threatens them. More than that, though. Employing the Lolita trope, a very different thing than understanding what Lolita is actually about, is an easy way of dismissing a woman, calling her out for being not just childish, but a child. Because to be a Lolita is to be a schoolgirl, a cipher, an object whose value is in its pliancy. And when a Lolita becomes inconvenient, well, then the narrative arc of a Lolita is clear. She dies. Obviously, and thank God, Fiona Apple survived this, despite everything she's been through. And it's not just the way she was perceived and treated as a public figure that has parallels to Lolita. Fiona Apple was raped when she was just 12 years old outside her parents' New York apartment, an experience that clearly traumatized and affected her for a very long time and continues to be a recurring theme in her art. Criminal, the song itself, if you interpret it through the lens of a young woman in an age gap relationship, the lyrics can give a really interesting peek into the psyche of a younger woman caught in an inappropriate and codependent dynamic with a much older partner who believes herself to be wielding more power in the relationship than she really is. In reality, a lot of the older men in these types of relationships are not only significantly older, but already in a position of authority in relation to the younger woman they're pursuing, clearly taking advantage of their position in ways that their victims don't necessarily have the capacity to understand. Lyrics like the opening stanza provide a look into the self-inflicted blame internalized by abuse victims, believing themselves to be the criminal, when in reality it's the other way around. And the song itself totally slaps. The minute it comes on and you hear that synthesized flute, you instantly recognize what song you're hearing. And that in itself, in addition to Apple's masterful writing, is another reason why the song is so powerful.
I don't mind telling you, my life was ended by your hand.
I didn't discover Emily Autumn until recently, and to say that I wasn't ready would be an understatement. It's rare in this day and age to come across a singular solo artist who's created such a specific and immersive artistic universe. Raised in Malibu, California, Autumn is a violin prodigy who was classically trained since the age of 4. Inspired by glam rock, theater, novels, and history, specifically from the Victorian era, her music has been described as fairy pop, fantasy rock, and Victorian industrial. Her oeuvre is an eclectic mix of glam metal, chamber pop, and abrasive electronic dance music. In addition to this, she also incorporates elements of theatrics, cabaret, and burlesque into her live performances, along with an all-female troupe of backup dancers called the Bloody Crumpets. But beyond this veneer of performative and colorful theatrics, the most devastating and powerful aspect of her output is her songwriting. Her songs paint an unapologetically vivid portrait of the female experience without reservation or concern for how it'll be received. all the way down to song titles like The Art of Suicide, Thank God I'm Pretty, and I Want My Innocence Back. But the standout track on her 2006 album Opheliac is Gothic Lolita, which draws from the novel in a sympathetic and extremely angry tone that could only come from the perspective of a survivor. This was the easiest #1 ranking in any list that I've ever made, simply because this song goes above and beyond to being the closest thing that comes to actually understanding exactly how it feels to be a victim of abuse and how it feels to reckon with it years after the abuse has taken place and you've suppressed it for so long to protect yourself. These lyrics sound like everything Dolores Hayes might have said had she survived and gotten justice, and they perfectly align with the ongoing themes in Autumn's remaining body of work, where she continuously traverses her experience as a survivor of abuse. The fact that she isn't a global superstar is a crime, but it's not exactly surprising either. Superstars have to be digestible and safe and unthreatening enough in order to have mass appeal. Autumn is none of those things, and that's precisely why I find her work to be so phenomenal. There's nothing that I'd love more than the ability to wrap up this video in a neat little bow, but that's impossible. Such a provocative piece of work like Lolita continues to spark debate among readers today because it was released into a world where people's perceptions of art and literature are always going to vary. And don't get me wrong, Lolita is a good book, a great book. But I also don't disagree that this story has also done net harm to real people. Look at what's happened to every woman who portrayed Dolores Hayes on the stage and screen. Do I think it's a coincidence that all of their lives were immediately derailed in the most tragic and appalling ways after they participated in these projects? Have you noticed that 70% of the songs on my list have been bad faith interpretations of the story? That's not a coincidence. And don't even get me started on the alarming rate of high school English teachers who have used this book to justify their own predatory behavior. I'm never going to not be conflicted about this. And that's why talking about it in extensive detail is the best way for me to process it after I've finally read the entire book.
I spent a lot of time listening to Shiloh and Aaliyah while I was making this essay, and it just really hit me. I mean, it completely got to me, totally affected me. Just how much the world loses in the silencing of young women. The sheer detriment it has upon humanity. Aaliyah died when she was 22. Shiloh has just recently begun to make music again. Who knows how much incredible art, how many scientific discoveries, how many budding academics or just excellent people are thrown into obscurity and squalor and judgment because of predators.
Anyway, I hope y'all enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for being such a patient audience and for having all this faith in me, even after I've been going off the grid more often. I appreciate you all more than you know. What was your introduction to Lolita? Leave a comment below if you feel comfortable, and I will catch you all in my next video. Thanks for watching.
You look 100% better when I can't see you.